What's up, heathens? How y'all doing? No intro music or anything tonight. Gnostic Informant Neal here, and I. Do you mind if I call you Neal?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, I'll just go by John as well.
All right.
We're here discussing whether or not Jesus existed, and I know a lot of people think that there's no real point in having this discussion. Like they're not really all that interested in the history of early Christianity. But this is one of the things I find the most interesting because, once you get past the whole magical Jesus thing, I feel like, wanting to understand early Christianity is kind of a next step. And I feel like that's what I've been trying to do for years now. So, Neal, do you want to tell everybody where they can find you, what you do over there on your channel and everything like that?
Yeah. Just go to youtube.com/Gnostic Informant and it'll come right up. Just type it in the search engine, whatever you want to do. And I do pretty much some similar to your channel. A lot of criticism of the Bible, also comparative religion, history stuff, mythology, some philosophy, stuff like that. Have scholars on, talk to them about their opinions and get different ideas and try to just keep the conversation going like you're doing right now.
Awesome. Yeah, and that's I really like your channel. I've been on your channel before,
Right.
and I think you have a lot of great conversations over there. So I definitely suggest anybody that's interested in this kind of topic that we're talking about today, definitely go and check out Neal's channel. I do want to give a big shout out to Insert Creative Username here for becoming a member of the Skeptic Mafia. Stay awesome there, Insert Creative Username. I don't. I guess you couldn't think of a better thing, but thank you so much for joining up. So, now is it? Would it be correct to say that we kind of stand on opposite ends of this particular question of whether or not Jesus exists?
I wouldn't say opposite because I would say like I'm on the side that he existed, but barely. Like I'm just over the fence. I'm like I might still have a leg on your side a little bit, but like I'm I'm leaning towards there was a guy. Except
Okay.
I'm with you in the sense that there's no primary sources. There's no physical evidence. In the first century, people mention Thales and whoever this other weirdo is. What's his name? Thales. Phlegon. Yeah, those guys. None of them mention Jesus' name. It's just like one person says, "Oh, the sky got dark," and so someone's like, "Oh, look, he's talking about in Matthew or whatever." And then there's another source where someone just mentions that a wise king was killed. There's like 20 Judean kings that were killed. So it's like that doesn't say. And by the way, Jesus wasn't even a king. So those little fragment sources, I just don't even talk about. That's not even worth my radar.
Well, I mean, those are good reasons to, disregard them because they don't specifically mention like Jesus as like a historical figure. But I think the more important thing for those sources is actually the dating of them because like they all come from a time period in which the gospels are firmly circulated throughout the Christian community. So any information that they would have gotten from Christians would have included information about the Bible. And at one point in the second century, or I would say early second century, it becomes difficult to sort out between gospel information and historical information. Right. And so I like all of the ones that you mentioned would be tainted by the gospels, and so that makes them not independent. And so like that's the ultimate reason why I reject those particular sources.
Right. Yeah, no, I agree with that. And then so what you're left with outside of Paul, outside of whenever you want to date the gospels, let's say 70s around there, right? Outside of the biblical text, you got Josephus, and that's it. That's the only person in the first, because everybody always mentions Tacitus. What about Tacitus? What about Suetonius? What about Pliny the Younger? Those are all 120, 110, 130. That's a long time. And by the way, what's so hard to grasp that they heard of the Gospels? Like Tacitus could have heard of somebody who read Mark and then said, "Oh, there was a guy named Crustus." He didn't even know his name. Barely heard of him. They're getting his name
Mhm.
wrong. So that tells you right there that the sources, if any, are so small, and this movement was tiny going into the 2nd century.
Well, as far as Tacitus goes, like obviously he could have got, like, ultimately he got his information from the Gospels because it's all information that corroborates the Gospels.
True.
So
Yeah.
given the time frame in which he was writing, it comes from the guy either through Pliny the Younger or just by Christians themselves, like somehow Tacitus got it that way. But I mean, there is a pretty solid argument to say that that part of Tacitus, the very Christian part of Tacitus, is interpolated. Typically, I don't feel like it's necessary to go into that because right on the outset, you don't need to prove that it
Doesn't
was
need to be,
interpolated in
right.
order for
Well, I think
it
that
to
about
not prove Jesus.
Josephus. So Josephus wrote his Jewish Wars in like the mid 70s, and then he wrote the Antiquities in the mid 90s. So the
Mhm.
verse, that the famous Jesus passage, that's almost in the 2nd century. That's late. So I don't. I get. I mean, I think we all agree that there is some level of interpolation that I don't know if you think do you think it's a whole forgery, or what do you think about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that both references are interpolations. I think the testimonium is a full interpolation, like the entire passage is interpolated. I mean, I can go into fuller detail about the counter scholarship to a genuine
Sure.
paragraph, but and then I think that the James passage was an accidental interpolation, so not malicious.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that at some point between Origen and Eusebius, I think that there was a marginal note put in that said, who was called Christ, as if to correct what was originally there, to suggest that this is the James who would be called Christ.
Hmm.
And then in later copyists, instead of putting what was originally there, they put who would be called Christ, because they thought that it was originally like a mistranslation or a miscopying. And so I think that it was an accidental interpolation there, as opposed to the testimonium, which is maliciously interpolated.
And I guess that's possible. It'd be hard to prove it, but I guess what is in your favor is the fact that Origen, when you look at Origen's response to Josephus, it's as if that he doesn't even know the testimony in Flavium is even there, because all he
Right.
talks about is the other passage in the Wars where he talks about, oh, it's too bad that Josephus didn't believe in Jesus. Which, by the way, if you read the testimony in Flavium, he would think he believed in Jesus, which he doesn't, which makes sense. So okay, so right there, you're good. But then he does say, but at least he mentions that his brother, being the brother of the Christ, was a martyr, and so we have blah 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 blah. He like sort of props that part up. Now, I don't know how you would be able to. I mean, it's obvious that the testimony in Flavium is, at least to some degree, altered. Even if there was something original, I think there probably might have been something originally there. And the reason why I say that is because I think by the time Josephus is writing his Antiquities, the Gospels are already out there. The Paul's epistles are already floating around. People have heard of him. I mean, even if whether he existed or not, I still think he does. But even if you didn't, Josephus still could have written all what he written, even if he didn't exist. There's no reason to make this up. You know what I mean?
Okay. Well, I mean, there's no reason for Josephus to make it up.
Right. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. There's no reason for. There's no reason. Well, not the interpolation part, but for Josephus to not write it. There's no reason for Josephus not to write it. Basically, does that make sense? Like, he could have. It's plausible that he would have known of a guy named Jesus by the mid 70s and mid 90s.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's plausible, and that would be awesome for him to mention it, but I don't think that he does. I mean, so I get that you think that it's only partially interpolated, right?
I think
And
that's
that
pretty obvious. I think even Christian scholars would even admit that.
Well, I mean, yeah, obviously they're going to admit that because they can't rightly hold. Well, some scholars try to hold to an original reading of how it exists now, but I mean, they obviously won't sit there and be like, oh yeah, a Jew believed he was a miracle worker and was the Christ and all this other stuff. But so I've actually got what I guess what I'm about to read. That just goes through the counter evidence that shows that it was probably not originally written by Josephus in any kind of way. But I've got it in a clip on my GE Shorts channel. Huh?
Do you know who it's by? I might have read it.
Multiple people.
Okay, I think I know what it is, and I think there's a good counter to it. But let me hear it first. Let me just make sure it's the right one.
Okay. Well, so first, you got to start with Alice Wheely. What she did was she proved that the version of the Testimonium Flavianum that we have today is the only one that's ever existed, at least as far as we know. There are Arabic and Syriac versions of it, but those are ultimately through chain of custody. This is what Alice Wheely proved, that they ultimately are. They come from Eusebius's version. So those are actually later redactions of the current extant version that we have. So that's what Alice Wheely does. Next, the original Testimonium was probably the one with all the very non-Jewish things in it. The original Testimonium was probably the one with the very non-Jewish things in it, at least the one that was originally there. This already makes it highly unlikely that Josephus would have written it. But you can also look at Paul Hopper's work in A Narrative Anomaly in Josephus, where he establishes that one, the Testimonium Flavianum uses finite verbs differently than Josephus. Two, the Testimonium Flavianum uses oblique and passive language to insert Pilate into its story, which is contradictory to how Josephus does it when mentioning Pilate in other sections. Three, the Testimonium Flavianum has completely different time organization than the surrounding passages. For the Testimonium Flavianum, seems to be absent of any plot, which is completely different from the surrounding text. And five, the Testimonium would only make sense to Christians. Now, G.J. Goldberg has established a link between the Testimonium and Luke's Emmaus Road story because there are 19 parallels between both works. It's not just the fact that these parallels exist, but that they exist in the exact same order of both works. And this makes coincidence highly unlikely, independence very likely. And then you get to Ken Olson, who has established that several parallels, both in language and content, between Eusebius's writing and the Testimonium. And then this coincides with the fact that the Testimonium seems to pop into existence right around the time of Eusebius. Louis Feldman then has also concluded that that a Christian like Eusebius is most likely the author. Phrases such as wise man, worker of amazing deeds, teacher of human beings, and Christian tribe are used by Eusebius to describe Jesus and are unused by Josephus outside the Testimonium. Additionally, the Testimonium fails to explain what it means to be Christian, which is uncharacteristic of Jesus or Josephus, considering that he does that for all these other texts. So, I mean, that's essentially a rundown of all the counter scholarship to the Testimonium being legit.
Yeah, I used to read those too, and I was sold by that argument until I talked to Steve Mason and a couple other scholars who are like basically their scholarship is focused in Josephus. It's not like this is like their special. Steve Mason is like the authority on Josephus text.
I mean, I'm not convinced by authorities.
Right. No, but I'm gonna let me tell you what he said to that, and this is actually made sense to me. So he says that number one, the placing of the text is actually, if you look at the text, I don't know if you read book 18, the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So you would at least agree that they all have a common denominator, is it's dealing with the calamities of the Jews, and the chapter opens up about Pilate. So we're talking about Pilate and what he's doing to the Jews. And then the next paragraph is about Jesus and Pilate. So he's already talking about Pilate. The topic doesn't really change. He's already talking about Pilate. And then he goes, and then around this time also, there was more calamities on the Jews in Rome, at the Temple of Isis. There's a couple of Jews that got in trouble there. And then he brings it back to chapter 4, where he goes right back to Pilate. He actually circles back to Pilate. So it actually makes sense the narrative fits perfectly. Now, if it was to be forged, that would, if you're gonna, that would be, there's not a single spot, in my opinion, that passage would fit better than where it is. That's my actual.
I mean, I think that if it were to have originally existed, that's probably where it did. But the fact that you could take the entire passage out and everything else flows seamlessly around it is an indication that it possibly could have been interpolated.
It's possible. I'll give you that. It's possible. But it also, I'm not sure what the Greek says, but it also says, and also around this time. I'm not sure what the Greek says. I haven't really looked at that. If it doesn't, that'd be interesting, because he's talking about Pilate, and then he says around this time Jesus, and then he says and also around this time, and then he goes to Rome. So there would be no reason to say and also. Now I think we should look up the Greek. I could be wrong. I don't know how the language is for that, but in the English version it makes sense. But I could be, like I said, I don't know what the Greek says.
Well, so how does the testimonium communicate a sad calamity?
Well, he's talking about Pilate. He's talking about Pilate and the incidents that are happening. Pilate being basically in charge and trouble happening. So Pilate kills all these Jews because they bring in these gold standards, right? That's the paragraph right before that. He brings in all these gold standards, and they're revolting, and he has to kill. I think it says thousands of them or something like that, like a lot of them. And then he says, also on this time, there was a guy named Jesus. And then he talks about his court case, or him getting executed by Pilate. So he's already, like, it goes right with it.
Well, yeah, but you understand that in order to make this argument seem likely, you have to fundamentally change what Josephus says.
Right. And that's what he said about the verbs and the language. When I asked him exactly what you said, the language he's using, the wise man, because I read exactly what you read, and I was sold by that. And I think it's still a good argument. I think it's still possible. And that's what he said.
No. I mean, so
his response to that was, if you're going to interpolate this text and make it look like basically it's the Nicene Creed. They injected the Nicene Creed into this passage. Hands down, they did that. Now, there's enough done to it that it would change the way Josephus sounds. That would explain that.
But you understand that there's no supporting evidence to suggest that it was changed in that way.
What do you mean?
Well, I mean, like I said before, Alice Wheatley showed that the only version of this passage that exists is the one with the highly Christianized version that talks about how, he appeared alive to them again.
There's other
he foretold. No, there's not. This is the only version.
The Arabic one is a little bit less crazy.
I'm sorry, Neal. Did you just not listen to anything that I said about Alice Wheatley?
I heard what she said. I'm not saying that she's wrong per se, but they're not exactly the same. That's a fact.
No, they're not the same. But with Alice Wheatley's work, she shows a chain of custody where the Arabic and the Syriac versions come from Eusebius's version. They're not an earlier version.
Yeah, we don't have.
They're copied from Eusebius.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Then you can't sit there and say that there are different versions that are that preserve the uninterpolated version of it.
Well, I mean, I would argue that the Arabic version does sound a little bit different. It does look a little bit different.
I mean, it does look different.
I don't know.
That's because the author of it redacted the Eusebius version and changed it.
Yeah, but then there still should be a floating around somewhere a Josephus copy that doesn't even have the passage at all.
I mean, you would think, but the only people that were preserving these particular things were the Christians, and this is the only thing that we have. Yeah. It's poor evidence. It's definitely poor as far as like evidence goes, and how we should have versions of it popping up everywhere. But it all depends on people preserving the text, and the Christians, they just simply didn't preserve like a lot of the texts.
Yeah, no, and that's what it comes down to. Is like, and that's the thing. That's why you can't. But that same, you could apply that same argument to, but you still can't prove that it wasn't there. If that makes sense, because as long as we don't have, all we have is what we have. So we can speculate all we want,
right?
But at the end of the day,
I'm not saying that proves that it wasn't there. I'm saying that it proves that as far as we know right now, given our current evidence, the only version of Josephus that has ever existed is the highly Christianized one that appears in the text.
Oh, I see what you're saying now. Okay, I know that. I know what you meant by that. But I agree with that. It's just that the only thing you can do is we can establish, there's no way he literally just recited the Nicene Creed in the middle of this book. But you can also, by looking around it, looking at what he's talking about with the Jews and Pilate and the calamities, you can seriously say that it does fit where it's at.
I mean, if like I said before, if Josephus were to have written about Jesus, this is probably the area of Josephus's work that it would appear.
Yeah, no,
but
that's possible.
No, I agree, but all of the counter evidence to how this entire passage is constructed makes it seem like it was constructed by a Christian in the 3rd century, somewhere around the 3rd century, and then inserted into Josephus's work in order to give yet another witness for a historical Jesus.
Okay, and so what do you think about, considering that the Wars was written first, 20 years before this?
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't you think now you basically have to prove that the Wars was it not only interpolated but forged, basically, right? Because if Josephus wrote about the brother of the Christ in the Wars, then why wouldn't he write about him in the Antiquities 20 years later?
Well,
unless he just didn't care.
I mean,
this was just that not important.
I thought that isn't the James passage within Antiquities? It's not in the Jewish Wars.
It's in the Jewish Wars.
I don't know about that.
I'm pretty sure it is. I would look that up. I'm pretty sure that James is in the Wars, and then the Antiquities is where you get the Testimonium Flavium. It's been a while since I looked at it, though, but that's what I'm pretty sure.
Let's see. Modern scholarship. The second reference to Jesus in Antiquities, Book 20, Chapter 9, which mentions the brother of Jesus who is called Christ.
Oh, is it Antiquities?
It's Antiquities.
Okay. Well, then, I mean, then I guess it is possible.
Well, I mean, like I said, I think that it was an accidental interpolation with the James.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what do you? I get it's possible. Like I'm with you. But how do you have to, at some point you have to speculate and guess. You have to just say he interpolated.
I don't think that you do.
So do you think what Eusebius or somebody changed both parts of the book?
No. I don't. Like I said before, like I think that's a Christian like Eusebius. Technically, what the scholarship says is either Eusebius himself or Eusebius's predecessor that took over after Origen passed on his stuff to him. But so I think that a Christian like Eusebius probably inserted the testimonium, and then at some point in there was an accidental interpolation for the James brother of Christ reference.
I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say it's impossible. I've always been open to that. Right. Like I said, I've always been open to this. Because I mean, outside of the Josephus, the reason why I'm focusing on Josephus right now so much is because this is the only extra biblical source that exists in the 1st century at all.
Right.
If this really was a forgery, then there would not be one person mentioning Jesus outside of Paul in the Gospels, or Clement, or Clement, or whatever. That's it.
Right. Well, I mean that's my position. I don't think anybody does outside of Paul, as far as independently goes. But I don't feel like I have to speculate at all on my hypothesis for this. I don't really find that my hypothesis has a lot of ad hoc reasoning, mainly because it relies on the only text that we have, textual criticism of the actual words that are written down in the book. It compares this particular passage to Josephus's other writings, and it shows a noticeable difference. So, like, I guess I just don't see how I have to speculate on this. I just come to the conclusion that it's more likely it was completely inserted by a later Christian person like Eusebius, rather than originally written by Josephus, considering how different it is from Josephus's other work.
Well, I brought this up to Steve Mason when I was talking to him because I really wanted to press him on this, and he really didn't have an answer for it. And I said, the fact that it's changed at all to any degree, isn't that just so sketch? Like, why are we like, why does everyone just pretend that it's like normal? Just changing the words a little bit, just like that's sketch. That to me, and then you look at Eusebius's other stuff, the church history, where he's just making stuff up, saying that Peter was hanging out with Philo and Alexandria. They were friends, they were buddies. That didn't happen. Like Eusebius was borderline criminal when the stuff he was doing. He was just making shit up, dude. You know what I mean? Like I brought that to Steve Mason. I was like, and then he even said, it's funny that Origen, which is what is Origen? The second, third century before he's before, like in between Eusebius and something like that.
Yeah, I believe he was maybe second century,
second or third century.
Hold on.
But whatever, it doesn't even matter because by the time it gets to Origen, it's like he doesn't even know about the testimony in Flavianum. But he does know about the James part, which is like why Origen? Why would Origen just randomly forget about the one part but know about the other part? That's why I sort of lean towards the James verse being legit.
Well, I mean, for one thing, if the James verse is legit, there's a lot of problems with it. But another thing is that Origen, it's been shown through multiple scholars have shown this, that the Origen was actually quoting Hegesippus rather than Josephus. So I don't feel like that's like a legit thing.
But is he still talking about what Josephus said?
I think that as far as the scholarship goes, it's concluded that while Josephus thought he was referencing or Origen was thought he was referencing Josephus, he was actually referencing a passage in Hegesippus, and that could have fueled a later scribe to quote unquote correct their version of Josephus to include a reference to Christ there. That's one hypothesis that doesn't exactly violate any of the evidence that we have.
Right, and to bring it back to what I said in the beginning, we got to remember this is all being written in the 90s, like by we talk about Josephus like it matters so much. If Josephus didn't, or if Josephus wrote about Jesus, then he must have existed. It's like as if he was like living in the 30s, like walking around with the guy. This is a lifetime away. So this doesn't even, what matters to me is how Paul, I think, but this is what we should get into next, how Paul talks about this Jesus.
Well, hold on. Before I do want to get into Paul, because that's very important.
Let's hash out as much as I'm here to try to, you know what I mean? Like I said, I'm not.
Sorry, we had a super chat a while ago, and I hope Robert's still here. I wanted to get to a good spot for us to break. Yeah. So Robert asked, "Gi, what do you think the state of gnosis in Western society is in Western society, given its proclivities?" And you can't use any nouns in your answer. 30 seconds now. Go.
He's joking.
Thank you, Robert, for your super chat. But I don't know if you want to answer anything there.
Just stay tuned, and you will attain true gnosis. But no, but my whole thing about the Josephus is I don't understand why like Christians or historicists put so much weight into someone writing in the 90s. Like Paul's already done. The Gospels are mostly written by then. I don't know, maybe it's possible that John wasn't written yet, but I think for the most part there's Gospels floating around by then. So it's like, even if whether it's interpolated, whether it's forgery, to me it doesn't matter. It's beyond the it doesn't make a difference if he didn't as from a standpoint from a mythicist, it doesn't even matter if Josephus even thought he existed, right?
Well, I mean, if Josephus, you know, authentically mentioned Jesus, I think that would make a stronger case for a historical Jesus.
Sure.
Um, I don't know how
Well, it wouldn't
much
prove it though.
stronger it would make the case, considering, of course, the time in which it was written, whether or not he had access to like Christian sources or whatever. But I mean, I agree that with him writing in the 90s, it doesn't exactly matter, but a lot of historicists put it up as like one of the defining things that proves that Jesus existed.
Right. They're like Tacitus. He's a firsthand. I've heard Gary Habermas say primary source for Tacitus. How is that a primary source? It's 100 years later almost. But
Yeah, I don't know why they would say that that's like independent or a primary source. That really kind of gets me there.
doesn't make sense. That's not what a primary source is. But anyways,
Right.
before we even get to Paul, I think the Talmud is interesting. And it's not
Okay.
because of I know the dating is all the way in through 300s, and I get that. There's a Jerusalem Talmud that's written in Galilee, which is a little bit before the Babylonian Talmud. And in there's the Mishnah and there's the Tosefta. The Tosefta is a collection of dialogue between first century rabbis. So, what's his name? Eleazar ben Harkinus and Hillel II, Gamaliel. So, these are real people, right? You agree with me, right? These are real people, right? These rabbis.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, there's no reason not to think that, unless you wanted to go full blown. It's all just fake, which you can because these aren't primary sources. But I just don't see the point in doing that. Even someone like Pythagoras, I just say he existed because of all of his ideas they're in his name and whatever. Whether he exists or not, I don't care. It's like Pythagoras is Pythagoras. But the same thing goes for these dialogues that are from these rabbis that were living in the first century in Galilee. And I just have no reason to think that even if they are written later, I have no reason to think that there's not some truth to these dialogues. I think the sources probably do go back to maybe the early second. Some of them may be into the late of the first century. That's from Peter Schaeffer and what's his name, James Tabor, who argue this, that these sources are legit, handed down. It's like a rolling text. The Talmud's like a rolling text. It's not like in 350 someone just sat down and started writing the Talmud. This is finished.
Well, I don't know if this will get us a little bit farther into the discussion,
Sure.
but I have no problem with the dating of the Talmud or anything like that. I think that the Talmud does record historical events from the first century BCE,
Right.
All the way back then. So I mean, I'm perfectly fine with the dating of the Talmud. I don't have a problem with that.
Which brings us to when they talk about Jesus. Now, I'll be the first one to admit it's so confusing. Like you don't know what time period this is. Just talk about Alexander Jannaeus being king. Let me finish, because there's a verse about he's not just in one place in the Talmud. He's in like 4 different places and for different. They bring him up a lot and throughout the Talmud. And in one of the cases, they're talking about him living under the time of Alexander Jannaeus. So I don't even. It's not even just pretend it didn't even happen. But the one that is particularly interesting to me is when they're talking about Eleazar ben Harkinus, and he's living in Sepphoris, which is literally right next. You can argue that Nazareth is a suburb of Sepphoris. Like if the Galilee was New England, Sepphoris would be Boston. It is the center of the whole entire region. So this guy is living in Sepphoris, and he comes across a follower of Yeshu, who his name is Jacob, and he apparently healed somebody in the name of Jesus, and it worked. So there's a positive story about him. Which, why would they do that? Why would they put that in there? And then they also later on say that the person ends up dying because it's sorcery. So it is kind of, then it turns into a negative. But the reason why it is a positive is because apparently Eleazar ben Harkinus gets arrested because he was like, they said he was sympathetic to to Jesus and the Christian movement. So there's real things are happening, and nobody's even thinking that he's not a real person when it comes to these Talmud dialogues. And then you also got the
Right.
trial. He says it's hung on a Passover Eve. His mother's name is Mary. Yeshua the Nazarene. He was doing idolatry, leading Israel astray. I mean, the odds are the odds. I heard some people say that's a different Jesus, but like, what are the odds
It
that?
is.
Well, so when do you think this happened?
Well, I mean, King Janaeus's rule was right there at the very beginning of the 1st century BCE, so that makes it between like 180 BCE, and a number of the things don't match up for that particular Jesus as far as we understand it for the the New Testament Jesus. And I mean, like the Mary, Joseph, Yeshua, like those were like super common names.
Right,
So I mean,
but hold on a
there's a
second.
solid chance that
But
that situation could arise multiple times.
but the odds that you get a Jesus from Nazareth whose mom's name is Mary, who they have an issue with his father. They don't know who his father is, and he's killed on Passover Eve for leading. There's too much. It's too perfect for it to be a different one. There has to be something, and the way they
Uh,
talk about it is as if like this is the Jesus. Now the dating thing is a little bit weird. I'm not sure. I don't have it in front of me
well,
right now.
you're
But I know
but I mean,
there's different Jesuses in there that they are referring to.
well, I mean, it's all the same Jesus as far as this goes. This is shown by the scholarship, which I could rattle off all the scholars that
I
that
could rattle the ones that
solidly
say,
connect, huh?
I could just rattle some more that say that this is the Jesus of the Bible. I mean, there's equal. I think there's equally amount that are saying they're both. You got James Tabor, you got Peter Schaefer, you got. I mean, I could just look them up, I guess. But
Well, yeah,
what's the
but
point
you
in
see,
doing that?
they end up having to ignore a lot of things. Like, for instance, he was killed in a completely different location. He was killed for a completely different reason. He was killed for, well, he was stoned initially, and yes, his body was hung. But the thing
It doesn't
is
say
that
he
he
was
was
stoned.
stoned by the Jewish Sanhedrin.
It says he was going to get. He was basically the phrase is he's going before the Sanhedrin for stoning, which would be basically saying he's going for an execution. But it says that
Right.
when they do kill him, it says that he was hanged, which would be the terminology used for
Well, right.
crucifixion.
That's been well in Jewish legal legal proceedings or whatnot. If you're convicted of something of that nature, stoning is how you would die, and then they would hang your body out like on a tree or whatever. Essentially, crucifixion. But that's actually part of the Jewish law that you would be stoned, and then your dead body is hung on a tree to be displayed. So that's in Jewish law. So that's actually how Jesus would have died, but it's still 100 years removed from when the Jesus of the New Testament was supposedly done. So
There, there
you
is an
have to
argument.
literally ignore a lot of information about this particular Jesus in order to make the case that this was the Jesus of the New Testament.
I don't think so. I mean, I think you got enough right. I think like the details I mentioned. I mean, there's how often. I mean, this is like the myth of all myths. And what are the odds that there just happened to be another Jesus of Nazareth with a mom named Mary who was killed on Passover Eve for leading Israel astray? Like, I just don't see it.
Well, I mean,
Now, the dating thing, I've heard this. This is interesting. I'm not saying this is true or not, but I've heard the argument that that's an interpolation on purpose by Jews because they banned the Talmuds in Rome. This is true. They banned Talmuds in the Roman Empire as early as the 4th or 5th century, I think it was, when they started doing this. And if you got caught with that particular verse would put people to death. You get executed for that. So they interpolated their own works. That's what I've heard that from multiple different people. I'm not saying it's true, but it's possible. You can't
I
say that.
mean, I haven't seen that in any of the scholarship that I've read on the Talmud Jesus, but I'll definitely look into it, I guess. But
The
I don't
other
have a good opinion on that particular idea. I just know that what the scholarship says about the Jesus in the Talmud makes him significantly different than the Jesus that we're looking for the New Testament. That it could not be him.
well, here's another one, and this is why I lean more towards this than the interpolation thing. This makes more
Okay.
sense. That they're just the details in the Gospels don't line up with the details of the historical Jesus, and I think that's pretty. I'm not saying that
Well, yeah, but
the Talmud might have it wrong too, though. They might both be wrong.
well,
Whoever's writing this is writing this a long time later. They might have got the dating
so right. Well, so let me see if I understand this right. You think that the Jesus in the Talmud is most likely the Jesus of the New Testament because a lot of the things match between this Jesus and the gospel Jesus, but at the same time, the gospel Jesus is radically different than this Jesus.
and because you
Is
got people praying in his name later on in the Talmud in different spots.
okay. Well, considering that the gospels come much later, I mean, don't you think that it's more likely that they could have used like that Jesus as
Sure,
sort of like a structure for creating there? Because
that's
if you
possible.
want to compare, I mean, if you want to compare it, Paul never mentions Jesus's mom's name, Jesus's dad's name.
I
He
was
never mentions any of this.
I was just going to get into that, and that's the thing we should like take the next 20 minutes on is Paul, because it all comes down to this. If everybody from Josephus to the people who wrote the Talmud to Celsus to all these other sources, if they all just bought Paul's Jesus as being real, that's all you have to explain it. All you need is Paul.
Mhm.
Paul could have invented Jesus, and then the rest is history. That's a possibility.
Right.
So I'm not leaving that out. That's on the table. Paul's the first one to write about Jesus. He's the first person to write the name Jesus in anywhere. It's Paul.
Right.
And that's what I think we should focus on. I think Romans is a good place to start. He talks about Jesus being born of the flesh and from the line of David
Mm,
according to the flesh. He said, born of a woman.
let's see. That's Romans. What
Let
is
me
that?
see.
Romans
No,
9:5.
I think it's right on the
No,
first or second chapter.
it's one. Uh,
Descended from David according to the flesh.
no, no,
Uh,
no. That's not what it says. It says he's a descendant of David, not according to the flesh.
which version are you looking at? Are you looking
I'm
at
looking at
Romans 1?
NIV.
You're
Let's
looking at
see,
Roman.
that would be Romans 1:3,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
mine says the gospel about the Son descended from David according to the flesh.
Let's see. Let's go to the Greek
I have
because
a
that's going
Texas
to be
Receptus.
more.
I have a Texas Receptus.
What's a Texas Receptus? Okay. All right. Yeah. So in the Greek, it does say according to the flesh, but
What's that?
yeah. But so the having come there in it is the manufacture word. It's genomai, and that's generally how Paul refers to Jesus's body being constructed, is that um it was made. So I'm fine with the according to the flesh part, because I do think that Paul thought that Jesus had like a body of Davidic flesh, which is what he's saying right here.
Yeah.
But considering the Greek word he uses to describe this body, it seems like he's talking about how it was manufactured, or it came into being, like it was created by God. He had a Davidic body that was created by God.
Yeah, I mean
Sorry,
that's
I was looking at the New International Version, which totally omits
yeah,
the in
the
the flesh
NIV
thing.
stuff.
So,
I don't know why they would do that.
anyways,
But but no, I mean it's possible. I just the language to me it just seems like why would he say that? I mean, then you have the whole
well, so what? Let me ask you this: why would he use the word genomai that means more like creation of something, creation of an object, rather than genao,
where are you
which
seeing this?
literally means born?
Which verse is this you're talking about?
Well, the genao. Hold on, I've got. mm, 1 second. I've got a little image that I did up for Paul's video. Get over here.
Oh, I think I see it. Get him on.
Yeah.
Genomanon. So
Yeah.
so came in this version, and it's translated as "come of the seed of David according to the flesh." That's what
Right.
I
Well,
mean.
become like the word means.
I guess in
Huh?
your favor, the way to explain that would be he has to be from David to be the Messiah.
Well,
So
right.
he could be forcing it. I'm just trying to like think for your like for your side. Like if this was a myth, that's what he would do. But then it's like we're speculating here, you know.
Right.
It is interesting though. I will say this.
No. Well. So hold on. Let me pull up. Let me share a window. Born here. Let me share this. Okay, so here's the image that I did up for this particular idea.
Yeah.
So in Romans 1:3, which we just covered, and Galatians 4:4, Paul uses genomai, which means to manufacture or come into being or whatever, which could be a way to reference somebody, being born or whatnot, but it's a very kind of weird way. But if you look in like Romans 9:11 or Galatians 4:23 and 29, you'll notice that he uses the word genao, which means literally to give birth, to bring forth, to give birth to begat, all those begats and stuff in the Bible. But Paul noticeably uses two different words whenever he's talking about either Jesus's birth or other literal births.
Yeah, no, I mean, like I said, it's what he said. That is what he says. I mean, I guess
My point,
speculating on what he's trying to say, but it does say,
well, right,
according to the flesh, it does say that.
Well, right, but like I said, I think that Paul thought of Jesus's body as a sort of fleshly body, right? Sure. Because Paul, had this idea of future resurrection bodies that are created by God. They are, they are like they're constructed for one by God, but two, they're somewhat flesh and blood as we would experience them, because that's how God has always appeared to people on earth whenever he's come. Like I'm thinking of Abraham when Sarai was in the tent and laughing about God and what he was saying. Like God was out there, flesh and blood, talking to Abraham. And then you got several other places where angels of God are flesh and blood and coming down and talking to people. So there's, having a flesh and blood body as a celestial being isn't really that out of character for the Jews. But so like I said, I don't have a problem with in the flesh, but it's very important the context in which that was said, and that's creating a Davidic body of flesh.
That's a possibility. I'll give you that. What about Galatians?
And I agree.
You think the same thing's happening in Galatians? Same thing?
Well, there's something different happening there, but I just want to say from the outset that all of these are ambiguous verses, and I don't think that it proves mythicism, but I also don't think that it proves historicism because of how vague those references are. Now, with Galatians 4:4, that's actually wrapped up in an allegory starting in Galatians 3. And later on in Galatians 4, he literally says these women are allegorical women. They're Sarah and Hagar. So, I think that he's talking allegorically about Jesus taking on a sinful body of flesh that was created by God. And then, that body has to die in order to absolve sins and resurrect in a sinless, perfect body that God has also created.
Okay. What do you think about Galatians 4:4 when it talks about?
Well, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, so but when it says born of a woman under the law, are you saying that? So are you saying that Paul? Like, I'm trying to understand where you're coming from. Are you saying that Paul is saying that there was a guy, but he's making it up? Like, I don't. I'm trying to.
No. I'm saying that entire section is an allegory. And so when he's talking about Jesus being born of a woman, he's talking allegorically about being born of a woman. And that matches with the words that he uses there, because he uses the same word, genomenon, which is from the root genomai, which means to become or to be created or whatever, to come into being. It's not as literal of a call to birth. You can look in different passages and other works and see how this particular word is used. And it talks like in Matthew 4:3, the same word is used to talk about how the stones become bread, or stones are made bread, or might become.
Yeah, but it also doesn't follow up with of the seed, though. It doesn't say the stone of the seed became bread. He's talking about a seed in this paragraph.
Well, right, and the seed is what was used to create the body, but that's not indicative of like a human like birth that happened on Earth.
Right, that's why I wanted to bring up Galatians 4, because he's actually saying born of a woman under the law, which would mean like adoption. I mean, he's not saying that he had a father, but he's saying he has a mother.
Well, being born under the woman means that you're being born sinful. And under the law being that you were born into the law of Moses or whatever. So I mean, he's just talking about being born sinful, and when God created that Davidic flesh, he used the seed of if you want to take it somewhat literally, he used the seed of David to create or manufacture this sinful body of flesh and blood, and in order for that body to die. But still, that's not a literal birth. That's God creating it.
So, I mean, I guess that's possible. I mean, I'm not an expert in Greek, but I guess it's possible. It's not enough for me to just say that I'm gonna like it. What my final, I guess, take on all this, like what you're saying is plausible. I guess it's true, but I just don't have enough to say that I can prove that it's a myth, if that makes sense. I'm hearing you, and I think it's a really strong case, and I think it should be debated and should be talked about. And it's nothing that people say, oh, that's like the moon being like cheese. That's ridiculous. Like this is a strong argument. I'm giving you that. I just don't have enough to be like, I know more than the scholar. I know more than the status quo. But I also understand that most of the scholars are Christian. So I keep that in mind too. So I do challenge it, which I'm doing right now. I challenge it all the time on my show. I have Mythicism on all the time. I think it's a really good, I think it's a strong argument. I mean, you look at the first century. We have all these writers. Philo. We didn't even talk about Philo yet. Philo's writing in the 40s about a God who has a trinity, about the divine heir. Who's the divine heir of all things? The Logos, he says. Calls it the Logos and everything. He says that Joshua means salvation in another paragraph. He's basically right there. If anyone's going to write about him, it's going to be him. And he doesn't even say anything. So that right there is like, that's pretty interesting. Pliny the Elder. He's walking around Judea. He meets the Essenes. He's writing about these weirdos, these weird Essenes. They're a bunch of weirdos. He's writing about all types of stuff. He's living in Caesarea. And he doesn't mention Jesus. Like, this is like in the 50s. So it's like, I get that this is a strong case. There's nothing to show that this guy actually lived outside of Paul.
Right. Officially, my position is that Paul is too ambiguous to point us in either direction.
Right.
Just to be very specific. Like, I'm not saying that Paul proves Jesus was mythical or he was never born or anything like that. I'm saying that there's nothing in Paul that can solidly say that he thought of Jesus as a historical person. And so that's my position on it. I don't want it to come off as like me saying Paul proves Jesus was, mythical or purely celestial or anything like that. Now, I do think that a strong case can be made that Paul thought of Jesus as only ever being celestial, but that's kind of a different question as far as what we're discussing right now. Now, but I mean, with Paul, let me ask you this question. Why do you disregard the resurrection as happening historically?
Well, I mean, I just think that it sounds like something to be embarrassed about. When you have a Messiah, he's supposed to unite Israel and usher in Olam Haba, the world to come. He's supposed to be a king that's triumphant. He's supposed to be all these things, and he's none of those things. Instead, he gets killed. He gets crucified. So I think
but they were there were some Jews that were expecting that, though.
Who's that?
Well, I mean, it's fairly obvious that there were Jews that are expecting that. If you look at the Wisdom of Solomon in chapter 2, I mean, it has a call to a suffering, disgraced, and dead Messiah that resurrects. And then you've got several places in like Zechariah where it talks about how the Messiah is going to be like killed and then resurrected.
Right.
And then, right.
Oh, I agree with that. I agree with that. But what's interesting about this is when you look at like Dead Sea Scrolls, or you look at these people that are actually talking about Messiah, there's an idea of two Messiahs, one triumphant, one suffering. I don't think that people were waiting for the suffer. I mean, I think the suffering Messiah idea gets applied to him after he dies. I think they're in a war with
What
Rome.
evidence is there of that?
Well, I mean, you got the Dead Sea Scrolls talking about the angels of light versus the angels of darkness, that Israel's going to win. The world to come is going to be ushered in by the Messiah. They think he's going to win. And then I think what happens is he's not the Messiah. He dies. And so they go to, okay, well, maybe he's a suffering Messiah. And that's when they start drawing from the Old Testament and finding verses of the Messiah suffering.
Well, yeah, but we don't have any evidence like of that particular progression. And I mean, Jesus did accomplish what you're talking about. So I don't know how Jesus failed to do that.
What do you mean? What do you mean he accomplished it? The suffering part?
Well, I mean the triumphant Messiah and the suffering part, because I mean it's foretold in the scriptures that the Messiah was going to come, he was going to suffer, and he was going to be killed and then also resurrected in order to defeat death. Now, it's true that the Jews have this two Messiah concept of one Messiah that's supposed to die and another Messiah that's going to come back and resurrect him after he dies. And the only thing that really requires, or the only big difference between Paul's Jesus being the one Messiah and this two Messiah idea from the other Jews is that Paul just has to combine them into one person.
Which I think they're trying to do that. I just think that it makes more sense that somebody would die and then it would be like, because it's not clear in the scriptures that he's going to be crucified or he's going to be like, it's the things that happen to Jesus it seems like something that you wouldn't want to admit.
That's a criterion of embarrassment, which is incredibly weak.
But that's what I think it is.
No, but you would have to establish that people like Paul thought it was embarrassing for him to be crucified. I mean, there were sects of Jews that would have thought that it was like that the Messiah wasn't supposed to die, but then there's also sects of Jews that had radically different beliefs and would have readily accepted a dying Messiah because that's what happened.
And another thing, though, is if I'm not mistaken, the dying Messiah is supposed to be the priest, and the king is supposed to be the triumphant one. It's like the Aaron and or not Aaron and Moses. It's like David and Moses, something like that, basically. A new Moses, a new David. But Jesus being tied to David, you would think he was supposed to be the king, the triumphant one. So I see what you're saying. It gets confusing. It seems like they're trying to combine them into one. But my point is, I think that after he dies, that's when they apply the suffering Messiah to him, because that's the only way to explain what happened.
Well, I mean, the suffering Messiah and this king are like some sects of Jews interpreted them to be the same person.
Yeah, no.
I mean, it's very obvious that is what it is. Plus,
I don't think it's obvious. Philo, it's very unclear. It's very hard to find.
I don't think that it is unclear.
There's not a lot of texts about it. There's not a lot of like writings about who the Messiah is going to be, what he's supposed to do. It's all very vague. Little piece here, little piece there, and I think they're
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think that given the situation, I think they create the messianic properties of Jesus after it's all over, and they're making sense of it all. and that's when you get all these messianic prophecies.
Well, yeah, but I don't think that I don't think there's a solid basis for saying that first Jesus died and then they tried to combine these two messiahs in order to make sense of it. I don't think that there's good evidence that Jesus even died, for one, but for two, we just don't have any good evidence that shows when this merging of the two messiahs happened. It's obvious that it did happen, and it happened before Paul, but we don't know if there was an actual death of the Messiah, or if that's just something that the Christians started saying.
I agree. It's unclear.
Yeah.
Don't forget that I told you that I'm out. I still have 1 foot on your side of the fence. Like I agree, man. Like I'm not dogmatic about historicity of Jesus at all. Like I think there's a really strong case to be made for him being a myth.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think
But so ultimately, what causes you to lean in the direction of historicity?
I think that I think there would be more, like, for example, I know the Talmud is all like insanely confusing, but I think there would be something on the Jewish side of history contesting this person living. There would be somebody saying this guy never existed. And it's like nobody even thinks about that. There's no one even like, it's not even like thought of. They're all just like, yeah, that guy, yep, he existed.
Well, no, I mean, but how do you explain? I believe it's 2 Peter. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, which one?
Let's see. Hold on. Let me see if I can get to it real quick. Yes, it's 2 Peter 1:16.
2 Peter 1:16. What does it say? Let me see. We did not follow cleverly devised myths when we made known to you the power and the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. We have been eyewitnesses of his majesty.
Yeah.
What about it?
Well, I mean, why would somebody? Of course, this is a forged book, right?
Right.
It's made up. It's not an eyewitness account of Jesus.
Right.
But why would you feel the need to stress that we don't follow cleverly devised fables or myths, but we were eyewitnesses? Like, why would you need to say that if nobody was mentioning it?
Well, because I think most of it is a myth. Regardless if you think there's a guy or not, that the story is a myth.
Well, right, but I mean, it specifically says that we do not follow cunningly devised fables or myths, which I'm reading from the New King James Version. I try to get something similar to what you got, um, and it's specifically that they were eyewitnesses to his majesty. So I mean, there obviously were people that were going around talking about how either Jesus was purely a celestial person that didn't walk on earth, or that more along the lines of the poorly named Gnostics that were going around, that who believed in a while flesh, still purely celestial version of Jesus. So I mean, there were people that were thinking this, and at that time, whether or not the Jews would have preserved that kind of documentation, or even the Christians, obviously they didn't preserve that kind of documentation. We still have hints of it in various places like this in the Bible, where it says that or it's making some kind of argument against this idea that that people were saying that it was just a cleverly devised myth. So I mean, there were people saying that.
Yeah, and like I said, I think most of it is a myth, even if there was a guy. And I think another thing for him being actual person is, this is going to sound kind of weak, which it is the fact that Paul is tying himself to Peter and James and these guys that it seems like he's making, like, it seems like the people that he's writing to, they know, they're well aware who these people are. These are real people, Peter and James and all these people. And it seems like that's his like token of like, yeah, I was one of the guys for a little bit. And I think he is tying himself to a real historical period in time. I just think that he's after the fact, and I think that, like you said, I think he is making a lot of this stuff up. I just think that it's based off something that actually did happen.
Okay, then I'm kind of wondering how you explain. Oh shit! If I could spell Galatians correctly. Galatians? No, that's not how you spell that. Hold on. If you go to Galatians 1:11,
okay.
It says, "But I make known to you, brethren, that the gospel which was preached by me is not according to man, for I neither received it from man, nor was I taught it, but it came through the revelation of Jesus Christ." So right there, he's separating himself from any kind of historical sourcing he would hope to have. Because in order to claim that, oh, I knew people that knew Jesus or something like that, would be antithetical to his position. So I guess where I have a problem with that particular argument is that Paul seems to actually hang his hat on the fact that he doesn't have like historical information about Jesus. He just has visions and scriptural evidence about Jesus.
Well, I think I actually think he's referring to this vision, obviously. I think that's what he's saying. I think he's saying because before that he wasn't with he was hunting them down or whatever. Which who knows if that's even true? I don't even think that's true either. But I guess what I'm getting at is, I think he's referring to his supposed hallucination when he says that.
You well, right. Well, that's my point. Is that he only ever cites revelation in scripture as where he gets his information from. He never denotes that Peter or James like were disciples of Jesus or knew Jesus personally or knew a historical Jesus or anything like that. He only mentions them as apostles, which, as we know from Paul, just means that you got a revelatory vision of Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, and then that's another thing is like another thing in your favor is the first person to actually start writing about this stuff is someone who wasn't freaking there. So it's
right.
I'm not that I'm and that wasn't me trying to oppose you at all. I'm agreeing with you in that part. Like it's pretty ridiculous that that's where we get the main source of all this from is some guy who showed up a decade later.
Well, and so that's why I asked earlier, like, why do you reject the resurrection as a historical event?
Why do I accept it, you mean?
Why do you reject the resurrection as like a historical event?
Well, I said I do think it's a historical event.
You think the resurrection is a historical
I'm sorry.
event?
I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about the crucifixion. I'm sorry. The resurrection.
Sorry.
Yeah, I just think it's I mean, why? It's because like I said, I think he was crucified and then he was thrown into Tartarus. I don't think there was I don't think there was there was even a tomb.
Well, right. I guess my point. I'm not trying to put anything into your mouth on this. The reason why I reject the resurrection is due to a lack of evidence that the resurrection did happen, or at least something happened akin to what the Gospels say. Like that didn't happen, but also as far as Paul goes, he never really mentions anything concrete about it. So there's just literally no evidence that ever happened. And so that's why I reject the resurrection. But similarly, that's also why I don't believe that Jesus existed in history, is because there's no evidence to suggest that he existed in history, at least no concrete or solid evidence that definitely points in that direction. The only thing that we have are ambiguous verses in Paul that might suggest he existed in history. But again, that's still, you can't really, it's my opinion that you can't use those ambiguous verses as evidence of a historical Jesus. So it ultimately comes down to no historical evidence for a Jesus. So therefore, I just don't believe him to have, existed historically on earth.
And so then how do you explain like just the random details about everything? Like him being from Nazareth. I know you get this a lot. This is actually, like, I know Christians brought this up, and this is actually, I think, is a really, really strong argument for the historicity. Why make him from Nazareth? What's the point of that?
Prophecies.
Which one?
Isaiah 11:1.
Isaiah 11:1. I gotta see this.
Well, yeah, it doesn't necessarily directly call him a Nazarene. It talks about him, about a branch coming out of the root of Jesse, which it's as far as like scholars go, they interpret Davidic, that to mean, huh?
Isn't that Davidic?
Well, probably, but I think that the scholarship, though, just talking about the scholarship, they suggest that there was a misinterpretation of that particular verse that gave them the indication that Jesus was supposed to come from Nazareth. And I mean, this is Rene Salm. He has a batshit crazy idea that Nazareth didn't exist in the first century. That really doesn't matter as far as Jesus mythicism goes. Nazareth could have not existed, but there was still a historical person. So I don't agree with Rene Salm's conclusion, but Rene Salm, cites scripture like a misinterpretation of scripture as a reason why Nazareth is associated with Jesus. And there are a few other scholars. I could bring up their names if you really wanted me to, but there's a few other scholars that also ultimately agree with that, is that they took Isaiah 11:1 because he's referenced as the branch to mean,
But Jesse's from Bethlehem, though.
I can't remember exactly how they argue it. I think that it was just like the words look like Nazareth or Nazarene or something like that. And so there's something in that passage that looks like Nazarene. The word branch? Maybe. I think maybe it's the word branch that looks like
before. I think there's something in Philo about this too. Something about Philo talking about the branch or something.
Maybe, but so it may seem arbitrary that I'm bringing this up, but the point is that Paul never cites Jesus as coming from Nazareth. He doesn't know anything about Nazareth. The first indication that we get about Nazareth is in Mark's gospel, which Mark isn't exactly clear on where he gets this from or anything like that. All we know is that Mark starts out quoting scripture, specifically Isaiah. And then when we get to Matthew's a little bit more explicit about where he's getting that. And he cites both Bethlehem and Nazareth as coming from the scriptures. And so that's why scholars have worked back from the information that we do have in the Gospels, because that's the only place where any of this comes up, and has determined that this particular verse, which seems to be referencing the Messiah, could be misinterpreted to mean Nazareth, so that would have later affected the Gospels when they were wanting to make up these historical stories about Jesus. So, I mean, that's the full explanation as far as all that goes.
Yeah. Let's see. The word branch in Hebrew is netzer. And
yes.
Okay. So, it's like I said, it's interesting. It sounds like it could be something. I mean, here's the thing. All this could be true, but it's like you're sort of relying on this got misinterpreted, that got changed, but I'm not saying it's not possible. There's all these moving pieces that have to sort of work out. Not that this has to happen, but it would explain why, like, because the Nazareth thing is a big deal. Like the root of Jesse is from Bethlehem, but the word Nazareth could be, it's an interesting wordplay. And by the way, the Essenes were weird like that. They were into, if you read Josephus, he talks about how the Essenes were trained to write allegorical interpretations of the Old Testament. So this could be some sort of weird pun play going on. It's possible.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I don't want it to come off as seeming like this hypothesis is very ad hoc. Right. I don't think it's very ad hoc, because it's rooted in the evidence that we have and trying to make sense of why does Matthew and all the Gospels cite scripture as the source for this information, and what in scripture could have led them to believe this. And so you can play what if games all day that you want to, but I mean, the fact that that it's noticed by multiple different scholars in the field that this Isaiah 11:1 could be misinterpreted to reference Nazareth. I think is quite possible and plausible, at least as plausible as the historicist explanation of, well, he had to come from Nazareth.
Right, and that's which doesn't make any sense.
Mhm.
I mean, what about like his him claiming his brothers like James and all the Jude? What do you think about that?
Are you talking about in the Gospels?
Like, just in the stories where I know actually it's a good point to bring up that Paul isn't really getting into the details about his life. Paul
Right.
barely even mentions anything as besides that he died for your sins, and like he doesn't give us much. He doesn't talk about. There's no Joseph. There's no net. It doesn't talk about any of it. I think it talks about James though, if I'm not mistaken, being his brother. I think
Well, yeah, but
as far as he
then
goes,
again, I mean, we could go into the Greek, but I don't think that it means a literal blood brother in Galatians 1:19.
which again, like this is another example of something that's possible because even today Christians refer to their other Christians as the brothers of the Lord. Like that's a thing. That's been a thing forever. So
Well, right, and Jesus wasn't considered the Lord until he resurrected. So saying that you're a brother of the Lord is literally like a faith-based title.
yeah,
So I don't.
but again, it's one of those things that you're like, yeah, it's plausible. It's not impossible. But again, it's like, who am I to just be the one? Like, I'm not like an expert. I can't just. I tend to just
Well,
go with the status, like with the consensus, and not saying that I just accept it with oh they're right no matter what. I am questioning it. I'm thinking about it and challenging it. But I just tend to go with what the experts are mostly saying. But at the same time, this is a completely plausible thing. I think. You know what I mean?
plausible that Jesus had
It was
a
a myth.
brother.
No, that he was a
Oh,
myth.
Jesus was a myth.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, yeah, and I mean these are ambiguous references. But you were mentioning the other brothers that are in Mark.
Yeah.
Um, I mean that's obvious. I mean that's the Gospels. I mean they're trying, like, everything that's done in the Gospels is meant to communicate a message. And I think with the mentioning of the brothers, I think that even then that's using a fictive kinship. But even if they weren't, it's a constructed story that's not representative of history, has no connection to history. So I mean, with him having brothers there is some kind of useful thing that it's trying to teach. And I think the useful thing that it's trying to teach is this assimilation into the family of God. And I think that ultimately that's what the appearance of the brothers are in that.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you something real quick because I've been
Okay.
reading. I read Philo a lot. I think I
Okay.
heard. I think it might have been you, might have been someone else. Something about there being a angel named Jesus in Philo, or is that someone else said that?
Well, no, yeah. So, I mean, what Philo does is he cites scripture, when he starts talking about the logos,
Yeah.
and he
Or he
cites
does that a lot.
I think it's is it Zechariah 6:12 maybe?
Which
Um, huh?
that's the one about the branch.
Possibly.
Yeah.
But in so the archangel that's mentioned
Yeah.
there is Yeshua ben Josephus, and that's basically Jesus or Yeshua. Save Jehozadak means like Jehovah approved or something like that. Is what it means. But that figure in Zechariah is supposedly the Messiah. And that's who Philo is identifying as the archangel figure.
That's interesting. I just wanted to see what you meant by that. But yeah, it's Philo over and over again. I mean, you could. I would even go as far. And M. David Litwa, even when I asked him about this, he was like, "Yeah, sure." I would even say that he's the proto Christian. He's the one inventing Christian theology. He's talking about God being a nature of three, not just once, like two or three times throughout his writings. He talks about that the heavenly Father will give the divine air, the logos, the reigns to judge all mankind. That's a
Mhm.
Christian. That's Christian theology, right there. And so it's
Well,
like,
yeah, the the most damning thing for me in Philo, at least, is that Philo describes the archangel Messiah figure exactly the same way that Paul and other Christians of the first century described Jesus,
Right.
using the exact same words and everything.
Yeah, no,
So
that's a fact. That's another thing that people should know about more often, I think, this because it's staggering. The way Philo writes about his theology is just it is literally Christian. Literally, without Jesus.
right. So I mean, I think the important thing about Philo is it proves that you can definitely search the scriptures and find all the necessary elements to create a Jesus-like figure out of thin air. Well, not sorry, that's bad. That's a poor phrase. Not out of thin air, but out of existing Jewish ideas. You can create this figure out of Christian or Jewish ideas, and he doesn't necessarily have to be a historical figure. And I think that Philo's identification of this archangel that makes it that much more plausible that that's what did happen, especially considering that Paul pretty much describes Jesus in the same way that Philo describes this archangel.
Yeah, I agree. And then I guess the only thing else we didn't mention is all those other sources like Tacitus and Suetonius and all
Mhm.
those guys. I just don't understand why people even bring that up in this conversation. We're talking about 100 years after his life, almost.
Yeah. I agree. I don't know why they bring them up, but they seem to be very convinced by those references. So, whenever somebody brings them up, I try to elucidate on the fact that they're written way too late. They're obviously influenced by Christian sources and everything like that. So, but I try to make sure that I I educate people on that. But I don't know why they bring them up. It's just it's a weird thing that they do. I think that the entire like historical argument should really reside on Paul and whether or not he identifies a historical figure.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and that's like I said, he doesn't give a lot about the details. It is a very Philo-like Jesus, the one that Paul gives us. It's very
Mhm.
Philonic in the sense that even when he talks about going to the third heaven, like it's not, you can almost tell that Paul is reading Philo. You can pretty much tell. And by the way, I was gonna mention this to you because if Jesus started off as a myth and then became humorized or humanized, however you say that,
You humorized?
humorized, if he became humorized over time, you would think it'd be the opposite of John going down to Mark and becoming more and more human, coming from myth to. But it looks like he's going from man to more of a myth from Mark, where he's like a person that's baptized, where in John, where he's the eternal logos. But the reason why I didn't bring that up is because Paul defeats that purpose. Paul's more like John in a way.
Well, I
Paul's
mean,
heavenly character.
right. Paul definitely does have a heavenly character. Paul, it definitely, he doesn't really mention anything about, Jesus's time here on earth. And I mean, I'm fairly certain that Paul considers him to be, a pre-existent being, just like John's Jesus. Now in Mark's gospel, it actually has Mark's gospel is actually an adoptionist type gospel. So like when Jesus is dunked in the River Jordan and then he's brought up like baptized, you actually have this archangel figure descending upon this Jesus figure in order to sort of inhabit his body. So Jesus didn't become the Son of God until after the baptism in the Gospel of Mark, and that's what the entire book of Mark is about, and that's why it doesn't matter what Jesus's birth was, because he got inhabited by this archangel or the Holy Spirit or whatever descended from heaven in order to take on that physical body.
I'm gonna guess that you don't think there's a Q.
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so. Yeah, I mean we don't have one, so it's like, I mean, I don't know. Like I don't know where I stand on that either. I know could go either way, but If there was a Q, then I think that would be a better case for there being a guy, because this is just sayings.
Well, I mean, I don't think so, primarily because even if there was a Q, it's fairly obvious that by that time people were
Oh, my camera died.
beginning. Oh,
Hold on, I got one.
I think that by the time that Mark was being written and subsequently Q, we don't know when it would have been written, but I think that by that time people were starting to make up things about Jesus, and so why we don't have Q, so we can't really critically look at Q to determine whether or not it's an independent source for Jesus. So therefore, we can't say either way, and that ends up being just another non-independent source.
Yeah. Hold on one second about this. Yeah, no, I just I don't know. I don't know why this turned off. Is it on? Still not working. I don't know what's going on with my camera, but there it goes.
Oh, there you go.
That was weird. Just shut off by itself. Anyways, yeah, I mean the whole Q thing. Like I said, I'm not an expert. I know a lot of really, really smart scholars think that it exists. Some of them are atheist scholars too, and I don't know.
Well, I mean, I know that you've said a couple of times that you're not an expert, and so you don't feel right contradicting the current consensus when you yourself are not an expert. But I feel like, experts write scholarly journal articles and everything to communicate to people their findings.
Right.
And I feel like people should be able to read those, understand them, and then weigh the evidence for multiple different positions. A good scholar is going to survey all of the current evidence surrounding a particular topic, like with like for instance, with the idea that Mark is based on Paul's work. I mean, a good scholar is going to survey all of the evidence, surrounding that, as along with the counter evidence to it, and then make the argument for one side or the other. And so I feel like while you're not an expert, you can definitely read the work of scholars and then make an informed and intelligent decision on what makes more sense. Because, I mean, I don't know if you saw the Mike Licona and Bart Ehrman debate that happened this year.
Yeah, great debate.
But I'm responsible for one of the questions at the very end of that, where Bart was asked, what's the current consensus in New Testament scholarship on the resurrection? And of course, they had wildly different ideas because, Licona said that most people in New Testament studies were not Christian, which mind blown with that kind of idea. Like, I don't know why in the world he thinks that most of New Testament studies is done by non-Christians, but whatever. Bart Ehrman, though, admitted that the being anti-resurrection is a fringe position in scholarship.
You're right.
Because most of the scholarship is controlled by Christians. And so I think that you can definitely make informed decisions by reading the experts in the field, but more importantly, reading all the experts in the field and critically weighing the evidence for both sides.
And that's why I wanted to have this conversation, is because this is a topic that really, really interests me. So, because when I was a Christian, I would go to the church and hear things from the pastor like, oh yeah, there's all this evidence that there was some guy in Nazareth, and basically there's so much evidence, and people wrote about him all the time. Everyone knew who he was. The Romans hated him. They wanted to hunt him down and kill him. It's as if they don't think that you're going to look it up. I guess most people don't. I mean, like, some churches just say whatever they want. Like, and so actually looking into these sources, I'm like, okay, let's see. What primary sources are there for Jesus? And you hear people say there's 500 eyewitnesses, primary sources. And like, okay, look, who are those? There's none of them. They don't exist. It's just Paul saying that there's 500 sources. And so once you start going down that path, and then you get, like, I went to full-blown mythicist for a long time when I first deconverted, because like, you're right. Like, there's no evidence of Jesus. Zero. It's just based off like why? I guess the main thing, like the main reason why I'm back to, sort of the going with consensus is it's like there's enough there that it's possible there's a guy. So why not? What? And then the other argument is, well, he's so ingrained in our society, and I know you're not going to like this, but he's so ingrained in our society. Everyone knows who Jesus is. Love your neighbor. All the stuff that Jesus taught that's in his name makes him a person. Like it's like Pythagoras. Like Pythagoras might have not existed, but the Pythagorean theorem still used in math, so it's in his name. So now there's a guy there, and that's just what happened.
Okay.
I'm just saying that to say, like, it's at the point now where it doesn't even matter if you can prove it or not. It's like he's just Jesus now. And I
don't think so, because I think that history is important, and not to say that you don't. I'm just saying that, like, I think that what we can historically prove is important, in this particular conversation, specifically the conversation about like early Christianity, what the early Christians believed. I don't think that anybody needs to go out there and start arguing with Christians, general Christians who don't even think about like the historicity of Jesus. I think that you have to wait for a very specific conversation to come up. But I don't know. I've tried not to just accept things without good evidence for them. And when I became an atheist, like, I didn't even question Jesus' existence. Like, it didn't matter to me. But I got into conversations with people, and people started challenging me, like, okay, well, what evidence do you have that he exists? I'm like, well, certainly there's got to be evidence. So I went and looking for it, and like, I found evidence for Pilate. Like, there's the Pilate stone. There's Josephus mentioning Pilate. There's I want to say, does Philo mention Pilate? I can't remember if Philo. Yeah. So I mean, like, there's multiple different ways to verify that Pilate existed, but yet we don't have anything solidly placing Jesus in history. And that's when I started really, looking into, well, how do you explain this? If there's no evidence to suggest that. And that's where I kind of went down the road of mythicism. And I get what the consensus says, and I get the consensus is there for a reason. I just think that the consensus is bad, and it's built on evidence that's akin to accepting that the resurrection happened. And I can't ever see myself accepting the same type of quality and quantity of evidence for the resurrection as I do for Jesus's existence. Like, it seems like if Jesus did exist, he should have solid evidence that places him in history, and we just simply don't have that.
Yeah, and I guess a rebuttal to that would be, like, not everybody had the resources to write stuff down. A lot of times you had to have a scribe, someone that can make the materials to write stuff down on, which was a process. Sometimes you had to use animals, like get the skin off the animals, or you had papyrus, which didn't last long. That just basically melted away after like a couple of years. Like, papyrus doesn't last that long. But anyways,
well,
like,
I mean, you can make the exact same argument for the Jesus that's under King Janaeus, in the 1st century BCE. I mean, there's no reason why anybody should have written about him, but yet people did. And then you've got Josephus, who mentions multiple different failed messiahs. People wrote about them, but the one failed messiah that seemed to really invigorate the Jewish Christian community in the 1st century, nobody bothered to write anything down about that particular figure. It seems really sketch.
But people like Judas the Galilean, Simon Perea, there isn't really anything written about them that's primary. It's all Josephus later on, like in this, almost like just the same amount of evidence as Jesus has. Just the fact that Jesus happened to have Paul, and then that makes a difference.
Well, right, but the big difference with Josephus and writing about those particular failed messiahs is that I mean, Josephus obviously references them as physical historical people, and he has his sources for those individuals. I mean, Arian is our best wrote our best biography about Alexander the Great, and I mean, we don't have any of his sources now, but he relays what sources he uses. And so I think that if Josephus authentically wrote about Jesus, it would look something similar to the other failed messiahs. But, we just simply don't have that in Josephus.
That's actually a really good point that you just brought up. And hold on 1 second.
I feel like your camera is telling us that we've been
this might be the end
long.
of it. This might be the last thing I say. Anyways, I just want to bring up this point, is that you hear like people, there you go. You hear people like Gary Habermas, who I think is an idiot. I'm sorry. I'm usually not rude about people like scholar, but this dude's an idiot. He's going around telling people that there's no sources for Alexander the Great for 300 years, which is false. Yeah. Ptolemy literally wrote the story on the walls in Egypt. That counts as a source. I don't care. It doesn't matter if it's in hieroglyphics or not. That's a source. And we can date it to the 4th century BC. So the story, and then Diodorus of Sicily writes this extensive story about Alexander from Philip of Macedon all the way down to like the Ptolemy 7 or something like that. I don't even know. So all the way down, the whole story, all this detailed stuff, and he tells you throughout his writings who his sources are, and these are 4th century BC people, and obviously those sources are lost. But for Habermas to not say that, to not bring that part up, is so dishonest. He's either dishonest or dumb. It can't be in between. It has to be one or the other.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, Habermas is definitely controlled by a statement of faith, but he's also theologically committed to the text. And so I feel like whatever he has to do in order to affirm the gospel message, I think that he's going to do regardless of.
He's not even. I don't even look at him as a scholar. He's a preacher to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that's the but I mean that's the kind of New Testament scholarship that's floating around out there, that's being floated as, sorry, I'm trying to get these super chats started over here, but that's what's being floated around. Like the arguments that Gary Habermas use are the exact same type and quality of arguments that people use for the historical Jesus. As far as like resurrection goes, either resurrection apologetics or historical Jesus apologetics, they usually end up being the same thing, because like Gary Habermas uses a criterion of embarrassment for the women finding the tomb empty. And in the same breath, you could use the criterion of embarrassment to prove that Jesus came from Nazareth. That's what at least Bart Ehrman does. He uses a criterion of embarrassment that way. So, I mean, the apologetics for both the historical Jesus and resurrection apologists are exactly the same. You either have to ignore information or make up information in order to make the arguments work for a historical Jesus. And when it comes to ad hoc explanations of things, I think that if somebody really existed, or at least for something that you should believe, I think that you should have as few ad hoc assumptions worked into that belief as possible. And I feel like the whole historical Jesus has way too many ad hoc assumptions about things.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say before you go to that is, if you were to take someone like Julius Caesar, because apologists do this all the time, they'll compare the Julius Caesar or Tiberius to Jesus and say there's more evidence for Jesus. But if you took Tiberius, any Caesar, Tiberius, Julius Caesar, whatever, you took him out of history and said he was a myth, there's a hole in history now. There is somebody who was an emperor at that time, and there's coins with this guy's face on it. And there's physical archaeology. With Jesus, you say Jesus was a myth, nothing changes. Nothing. There's no hole in history. The book's still the same. It's still the same myth. There's no physical evidence to begin with, so you don't have to explain how that got there, because it doesn't exist. So there.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that all of Paul's writings wouldn't be affected at all either.
It doesn't affect anything. Nothing changes. He can be a myth, or he can't be a myth, and nothing changes. With someone like Caesar or Alexander the Great, who literally founded like 45 cities in Asia named Alexandria, like, come on, dude. I can't. People who say that shit, I just can't take them seriously. It's hilarious.
But yeah, we do need to start getting out of here. Which this was a
I didn't
great
realize how long this
conversation.
was. Holy shit.
Yeah. Well, hey, I really appreciate you coming on here to talk to me and argue with me, I guess,
Yeah, it
over
was
some
fun.
of these things. I didn't really see it as an argument, but
Right.
discussing things. But we do have some super chats. Henry M asked, you both need to start writing books. You have so much knowledge to share. The world needs your knowledge.
Thank you.
I'm an engineer. I don't write. Other than code, I write code, which, by the way, if you want to look in the description, I have a link to the Crestus app, which is a compilation of all, like, a lot of this knowledge in there that I'm constantly trying to update. I haven't been able to update it, in a while, but I've been constantly working on making it better. So if you want to check it out, it's crest.us. You can go there and you can download Crestus, and it's got. I'm working on getting a search feature in there, as well as a better Bayesian calculator, in case anybody likes that. Some people are missing it, so. But next we got Jason Cul-de-sac, who says, "So we're cursed with Christianity because Mary stuck the neighbor and had to make an excuse to her still virgin husband." I mean, if you take the Gospels at their word, sure, maybe.
Unless you take the Talmud serious with the Pantera thing.
Yeah, well, I mean, and then there's Celsus in the 2nd century,
right,
who made it out to be like Mary
Pantera.
just fucked a Roman soldier named Pantera. But and then we've got Mini Van Tizen, maybe nice. True Gnosis. Not sure what that's supposed to mean. I guess maybe we attained true Gnosis.
Yes.
Yeah. And then we got Natalia Emerson, who says, "What do you think about Carrier's dying and rising hero archetype? What do you think there?"
I think he's right. I think even if there's a guy, Carrier you cannot argue that Carrier's wrong. That the gospel writers, when they're putting this Jesus together, checks all these boxes. He's the Son of God. He gets afflicted by an evil force, and he overcomes it, and then he gets resurrected, and then he's it's all there. It's all, you see the same thing in Romulus. You see the same thing with Attis and Osiris and Dionysus and all these gods that come before. Yeah, basically, I agree.
Well, one thing that really kind of solidifies it for me is actually the opinions of the first church fathers. I believe it was Justin Martyr who said that, these things that we believe about Jesus, being his death and resurrection and all this other stuff, is the exact same things that are said about the sons of Zeus and like all the, these other pagan gods out there. So it's not really anything all that weird. I think that, what's that? What's the
this
book
is Mary Beard's Religions of Rome, and she has a translation of that, what you just said, in here. And one of the things he says is, I'm not even going to bother. We're just going to end anyway. One of the things she says is that the reason why all these other religions sound so much like Jesus is because the demons did it.
Yes.
He blames it on the demons.
Yeah, he says that it was the devil or demons that went back in time or in time created those things to cast doubt on the resurrection of Jesus. It's quite odd. And then Fire Saber says, "Thanks for the good conversation," and I really appreciate that, Fire Sabers. And I appreciate everybody watching tonight, and especially Neal here from the Gnostic Informant. I know that your camera's down, but Neal, do you want to tell everybody where to find you?
Yeah, just go to youtube.com/Gnostic Informant, and there you'll find me.
Yeah. And I've got his links in the description down below if you want to check out his channel, also his Twitter. And I just want to say, staying, skeptical on this question is a good idea. But I really think that you need to give yourself a little bit more credit when it comes to analyzing, scholars' claims. And because I think that you can definitely come to a reasonable and rational decision, whether that's mythicism or not. I think that you're definitely more than capable of reading the scholarship and making an informed decision for yourself. So However that turns out to be, I mean, it doesn't matter to me. I just love having this particular conversation with people. So I appreciate you coming on here, Neal, and I'm sure that you'll be on in the future to talk some more stuff.
Yeah, man.
Either about Jesus or other things.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
All right. Well, we're going to head out, heathens. I appreciate everybody that's been in the side chat for interacting. I've noticed that we've had some people in there that, aren't on the historical Jesus or aren't on the mythicist side of things, that are more on the historical side of things. And I really love that we can come together and have good conversations for the most part. Sometimes these things devolve into like really, I guess dumpster fiery kind of discussions, but I'm so glad that we were able to have a good one tonight, put on a good show for everybody to watch. And thanks to all the super chatters and everything like that. Keep in mind that a portion of all of our proceeds here on Godless Engineer are going to be going to a charitable effort that we're going to let you guys know about before the month's out, which is getting close, but we're busy looking into charities. So I guess we will see you heathens later. Don't forget to stand up, use your voice, and all that kind of good shit. And I guess we will see y'all tomorrow.